So as the provost has told us, this is the provost colloquium, and this is a very competitive component of, to be able to present. But none of this would have happened. She did, thankfully, say very nice things about the faculty, but none of this would have happened without her and her support. And what's beautiful about the colloquium, the provost colloquium, is that it gives us an opportunity for faculty and staff to showcase their creative and scholarly endeavors. And so today, I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce Eugene and Jim on this topic, and because I'm afraid I'm gonna forget stuff, I wrote down a couple of things. Give me a second. It disappeared. The first thing I want to say is that Eugene Galperin is an associate professor in the math department, and he actually came here the same year that I came, in 2003. He has so many interests, and his intellect runs so broad and so deep, it's humbling. In 2013, he actually started a series, Why Opera is Still Relevant Today, and has presented other talks on opera. In fact, this is his 17th presentation. And so we're very happy to have him here. And today he's teaming up with Jim Maroney, who came to ESU in 2001 as a professor in the music department. And again, here's another person with just such intellectual heft and giftedness that it's amazing that we have this here at ESU. And it's exciting for me to be able to hear Jim and Eugene today. Jim has actually participated and had over 30 roles in opera. I mean, that's just amazing. And in fact, one of those roles that he had was in this opera that they're going to be discussing today. So I welcome you all, I thank you all, and now for Eugene and Jim.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Provost Bruno. Well, the occasion for this talk, and that's usually the case, is the upcoming broadcast at the local Stroud Mall Cinemark Theater of La Traviata, the opera by Giuseppe Verdi. We're very lucky here. We're able to enjoy the best opera in the world from one of the greatest opera houses, Metropolitan Opera, without leaving town. It's right here. We have altogether 24 broadcasts per year, it is, I think, one of the great cultural opportunities. And this talk is intended as a bit of an introduction for those who might consider giving opera a try. So anyway, who cares about the opera? Why should we be interested in the opera? Well, my thesis advisor, Karl-Heinz Gröchenig, an Austrian mathematician, once dragged me into the opera house. It was 20 years ago, for which I'm almost as grateful to him as for supervising my thesis, because that probably affected my life just as much. I can't imagine life without opera anymore. But in general, from my point of view, and I'll jump at the opportunity to share my fascination with Italy, because opera came out of Italy, and I think anything that has come out of Italy is fascinating. The best things in life really have come out of Italy, I think. Like, as we drove here, we may have driven on the road, and the Romans, it was the Romans who figured out how and taught the rest of the world how to build roads. They built 250,000 miles of them, 5 times as much as the entire US interstate system, and some of them are still in better conditions than the road behind my mom's house. But more closer to home, we are while driving here, we may have turned on the radio, and it was Guglielmo Marconi who invented the radio. And we're here at a university, which I think is a wonderful thing, and an Italian invention. The university was invented in Bologna in 1088, almost 1,000 years ago. And I would say closer to home, if we think of music, well, the violin was invented in Cremona, and so were the other members of the violin family and perfected there. And the piano, how can we imagine life without the piano? Well, that was invented by a harpsichord maker, Bartolomeo Cristofori, also in Italy. And in fact, so sometimes we go to nice restaurants. And it was Catherine de' Medici of Florence who brought the art of her chefs and the art of fine dining from Italy into France, from where it spread through the rest of the world. So it really was Italy that taught the rest of the world how to do things and how to live life well. We can also mention that we wouldn't even be here had it not been for an Italian mariner, a Genoese mariner, Christopher Columbus, followed by Giovanni de Verrazzano and Amerigo Vespucci, as in America. And actually so defining has the Italian influence been on the rest of the world that historians even mark historical eras based on events and developments in Italy. The Middle Ages started when Rome was sacked by the Ostrogoths, and it was developments in Florence that marked the beginning of the Renaissance. And the Baroque era actually has a birth date. Anyone knows when the Baroque started? October 6th, 1600 in the afternoon. Yeah, that's because that's when the first work of art that we now call opera was premiered in Florence again. And why was it that opera was so important that we should mark a historical era based on the first premiere? Well, the purpose of the Renaissance, the idea of the Renaissance was to reconstruct the ancient Greek and Roman, to an extent, art and culture. And the painters and sculptors and architects obviously had an advantage because they could see some of the remnants of the ancient art. Musicians were at a disadvantage because they couldn't hear what the Greek the Greek music must have sounded like, but they could read about the Greek humanistic ideal of music, and that is when music is joined to words, particularly words of a drama, the emotional impact of the words is deepened 100-fold. And that is exactly what the creators of the opera were trying to do and succeeded in doing. And in doing so, they also succeeded in combining all types of music, spiritual and secular and dance and love poems, etc., under one umbrella, all in the service of heightening the dramatic expression. And that's really what opera is all about. Now, why is it relevant today? Don't we have movies with musical soundtracks? And don't we have theater also with music soundtracks sometimes? Why is opera still important? Well, there are certain things that opera does that movies and theater cannot do. In a drama on stage, the dramatist who wrote the words gave them to the actor, and now it's up to the actor to interpret them. But on the opera stage, the singer, also the actor, gets huge amount of help from the composer, who has already dramatically interpreted the words, and we're much more likely to get a powerful, dramatic, emotional impression in the opera house than oftentimes during a theater production. Speaking of movies, When we hear a soundtrack, well, we don't usually have people talk at the same time, certainly not many of them at the same time, because that would create, if everyone's talking at the same time, it's a mess. Now, on the opera stage, however, a composer has carefully arranged the singing lines in such a way that we're able to perceive, with the help of music, the emotional and views and the dramatic development of everyone on stage at the same time, something that's almost impossible in other genres. And for that reason, opera remains, to this very day, probably the most is capable of delivering the greatest emotional charge of all the dramatic arts. Now, I've mentioned how important Italy has been, how defining developments in Italy have been to the world history. But it's interesting to point out that Italy is a very young country, younger by a century than the United States, actually. As recently as 1858, there was no such country as Italy, and Italy was, as Austrian rulers of Italy would point out, a mere geographical expression to infuriating all the Italian patriots. Italy consisted of numerous states, most of them controlled by the Austrian superpower. It was after the Napoleonic Wars that the movement to reunify Italy and to rid it of the Austrian control has really begun, and the movement was called Risorgimento. Now, the movement, as many other movements, have important names attached to them. The founding fathers of modern Italy, Manzoni, Garibaldi, and especially Camillo Cavour. But if you listen to Italy's chief of police in 1901 by the name of Antonio Fogazzaro, he said the following: Giuseppe Verdi, someone other than those three founding fathers, Giuseppe Verdi deserved more than anyone to be the symbol of the heroic era of Risorgimento, that is the movement for unification and independence. Verdi was Italy's great unifier. Because of him, we felt that we were all Italians. Now, in that, Verdi, the composer we're going to be talking about, is unique, perhaps, among all the important figures, historical figures, because can we think of anyone about whom we would say, because of him or her, we feel that we're all Americans? I can't really think of anyone, and nor can I think of anyone in Germany or England or just about any country. And Verdi deserved to be spoken in that way by a chief of police, and certainly by many other people as well. So what is it that was so special about Verdi and his music? Well, the reunification of Italy was, in reality, sometimes hostile takeover of the Italian peninsula by the army of Piedmont, with the capital of Turin, where the Fiat cars come from, aided by another superpower, France. And when the unification was very much on its way, in 1861, 10 years before the completion of the process, Camillo Cavour, recognized as the father of modern Italy, famously said, "Now that we have united Italy, we need to create Italians." And what Cavour had in mind was that all these people in all these areas spoke different dialects. They had completely different political agendas, completely different views on life, and very few of them even had any idea of what the patriotic idea of united Italy must be. And so something had to be done to unite Italy politically, economically, process still underway today, and culturally, and it was music, particularly the operas of Giuseppe Verdi, that did more than just about anything else to bring about cultural unification of Italy, because that music and his operas were understood everywhere, and it was one thing that everyone in Italy could agree that that was something great, and spoke to all of them. And I would like to show you what is probably the most beloved tune in Italy. I've heard it sung in Italy at all places, all kinds of places, for all kinds of reasons, or for no reason, just because the Italians like to sing and because they love this and because they love this tune so much. It is from Verdi's third opera, Nabucco, and this is the chorus that made him famous. It is called Va pensiero sul ali dorate, which means fly thought on wings of gold. And this is what it's all about. The opera is about ancient Israelites, ancient Hebrews, whose country had been overrun by the local superpower, Babylon, and they are singing about their longing for their beautiful, lost, occupied, controlled homeland. And the words here, I'm going to read the first two stanzas of the words in English. It sounds better in Italian, believe me, but we're going to hear it in Italian. Go thought on wings of gold, go settle upon the slopes and the hills, where, soft and mild, the sweet air of our native land smell fragrant. Doesn't sound like the Judean desert, if you ask me, but okay. Greet the banks of the Jordan and Zion's toppled towers. O my country, so beautiful and lost. O remembers, so dear to us forever. So those are the words, and it didn't take the audience very long to identify themselves and Italy's situation with the ancient Israelites and ancient Israel's situation. And the next morning, Verdi woke up famous, and the next morning, this chorus became the unofficial anthem of Risorgimento. And to this day, there is continuing talk about making it the official anthem of Italy. And meanwhile, it's the official anthem of Lega Norda, which is the bloc of northern political parties in Italy. So let me play this. I won't play the entire thing. I will play just the introduction and the first and the first two stanzas. My apologies for interrupting halfway. We need to move on. Now, Giuseppe Verdi, did not become Italy's greatest composer just because he was political in some of his most famous pieces. It was mainly because he was doing what opera is all about, writing a music that speaks to human souls about and expresses human emotions and human conditions and human drama. And here is a little bit of biography. We can read in Wikipedia that Verdi was born in 1813 in the village of Leroncole in the province of Parma. And can we imagine life without Parmesan, which comes from Parma? But anyway, in Emilia-Romagna, in the region of Emilia-Romagna, and here would be the view from Verdi's bedroom window, which to me looks like Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia all put together. Absolutely wonderful countryside. And this region really is the breadbasket of Italy. It's the farming country. Here are the Alps, and right under the Alps, helped by the rivers flowing down from the Alps, is the farming country. But this is Italy. And Italy is unique because just a brief list of place names in Italy that are important for the development of Western civilization would take the rest of our talk. So even though it looked like Tennessee and Kentucky put together, 80 miles away, like the distance from here to New York, was the city of Bologna, home of the world's oldest university. And lest we think its glory is in the past, as recently as 2000, it was voted European Capital of Culture and Europe's City of Music. Now, 50 miles away, like from here to Allentown, is Milan, Italy's main industrial and commercial center, and home to Milan's conservatory, where Verdi wasn't admitted, to his luck, actually, because he ended up working privately with the composer, and home to La Scala Opera House, where many of his operas would be premiered. And 10 miles away, just 10 miles away, was the city of Cremona, the birthplace of Claudio Monteverdi, the composer who composed the first operatic masterpiece in history. Also the birthplace of modern violin, viola, and cello, and the instrument makers. So there were opportunities for study and learning very close to home. Now, Verdi's parents were taverners, most likely illiterate. And so they were fairly poor, and this is Verdi's home. It's a tavern, and so Milan and serious study of music aside, Verdi's musical education started at birth. Because what do people do when they go to a tavern? They eat, they drink, and they talk. And in Italian, you cannot possibly talk without singing. It just isn't possible. Because let's say, in English we can say, this park is very nice. Okay, you can say this park is very nice, right? In the Italian for that is I giardini pubblici sono molto bene. How can you say that without singing, even after you had something to drink? So anyway, folk songs really were Verdi's birthright, and again, his folk musical education at least started at birth. And should we be surprised that he was superb at composing drinking songs? So let's hear one. And may I ask you to take a look at the female singer. Now, and this is from the opera that we are going to hear more about from La Traviata. This is what's going on. And I will give you a very brief synopsis of the opera right now. A young man, he's 21, according to the story, Alfredo, often visits a salon, a social club, hosted by Violetta Valéry, a famous high-class courtesan. Now, we're in Paris, so things were done differently and viewed differently at the time. This is where all the wealthy and powerful and rich, as well as the writers and the musicians and the poets, would hang out for their social time. And Alfredo likes Violetta, and he proposes a toast to love. Now, eventually, he persuades her to take him seriously, and they move out into the countryside. But Alfredo's dad thinks that is bad for the family name, and he persuades Violetta to break with his son, which she does. Alfredo is infuriated. He finds her, offends her, makes an ugly scene, fights a duel with one of her patrons, ruins the family name, moves out, and a year later, when Violetta is about to die from tuberculosis, is when Alfredo's dad confesses to him his role in the whole affair, and he is just in time to ask for her forgiveness before she dies. So that's the brief synopsis. Now let's hear the drinking song from the very beginning. This is the first thing they sing together. My apologies for interrupting. This is actually part of a 13-minute long scene, which is very dramatic, forward-moving, and is so seamless, it's hard to find a spot, place to stop it. Now, I gave you a very brief synopsis, and now, surprisingly, this melodramatic story is based on a true story, moreover, on an autobiography, not Verdi's, though. Alexander Dumas Jr. would become one of 19th century most important writers in France. He is often credited with creating the genre of psychological drama, and one can say that he happened as a writer, that he succeeded as a writer, thanks to a relationship, a year-long relationship with Marie de Plessis, a famous French courtesan. He met her when he was 21 and she was 22, and Marie de Plessis is quite an amazing person. She was born in the middle of nowhere. She moved to Paris by herself at the age of 15. She was illiterate, she couldn't read or write at the time, and she was working 18 hours a day at a dress shop. But thanks to her not just charms but also intelligence, she became one, and again, it's a different place and a different time, and a different ways of looking at things. She became one of the most famous courtesans of Paris, and she is known for her relationships, long-term relationships, with France's most famous politicians and also writers, and her last a long-term relationship was with Ferenc Liszt, one of the greatest musicians who ever lived. And the one before happened to be with Alexander Dumas. And she was a hostess of one of Paris's most famous literary saloons, where the writers and musicians and others would hang out. And that's where Alexander Dumas the Junior met her, and that relationship was apparently the most important and influential one in Alexander Dumas' life. At least he outlived Marie de Plessis by almost 50 years, but he happens to be buried very close to her, and that's probably not coincidental. Anyway, Marie de Plessis died at the age of 23 of tuberculosis, and shocked by her death and also feeling the fundamental importance of their relationship to her, Dumas wrote the novel The Lady of the Camellias at the age of 23. He was 23 then. Which made him instantly famous, and which happened to be one of the most important novels of the 19th century France. And the reason why it was so important is because in that novel, Dumas took on the prejudices, the hypocrisy, and other vices of the high society. And one of the very first to do that in France in a very powerful and emotional way. And Verdi, when he read the novel, well, that was very much to Verdi's liking. Verdi was not just a composer. He grew up among the farmers. He always wrote how he wanted to be one of them, and he wanted his music to speak to simple people. Verdi had no pretensions, zero tolerance for pretensions, for hypocrisy, for again, high-class pretensions and other things. In his personal life, he often took on prejudices and hypocrisy, and the story was very much to his liking, and he very much put his heart into composing the music. And Dr. Maroney has prepared a selection of highlights from the opera for us.
Thanks, Eugene. So I'll be going a little bit more in-depth into what's happening in the opera, presenting some major musical highlights, as well as featuring some very prominent singers over the last few years who have become well known through singing this opera. First of all, just to reiterate, the three main characters are Violetta, a courtesan, Alfredo, who is Violetta's lover, and Giorgio Germont. Now, even though everybody else is referred to by the first name in opera tradition, he is referred to as Germont. And then we have the other subsidiary characters. So again, everything revolves around these three characters: Violetta, Alfredo, and Germont. So we are in Act 1, and we just heard the famous drinking song there, and that begins the opera. And so after that, we hear Alfredo and Violetta sing the aria in duet, Undi Felice, in which he tells Violetta that for more than a year he has been hopelessly in love with her. Violetta realizes his sincerity, because at first she's very, very skeptical, but replies that she's unworthy of such love. So after everyone has left the party, Violetta sings the tender aria A forse lui che anima, in which she realizes that she has finally learned what true love is. Yet immediately afterward, her mood changes, and Act 1 concludes with her singing the aria Sempre Libera, in which she says she will forget Alfredo's love by pursuing new pleasures. Now, the aria Sempre Libera is a true tour de force. It requires a coloratura soprano, that is a soprano voice that is capable of singing extremely high and very rapidly, and making it all look very, very simple. And the artist I've chosen for us to hear is famed soprano Beverly Sills. She was, during the 60s and 70s, perhaps America's leading operatic soprano, even featured on, as it says there in the cover of Time magazine in 1971, as America's Queen of Opera. And even after she retired in 1980 from singing, she was very much involved in advocating for the arts through her work with New York City Opera and being chairwoman of Lincoln Center and the Metropolitan Opera. So we're now going to watch her, listen to her, see her perform the aria Sempre Libera, and this is from a live performance at Wolf Trap Festival in 1976. Truly a very challenging aria to sing, and she certainly makes it look quite easy. So we're now in Act 2, and we find ourselves in Alfredo's country home near Paris. He's elated that Violetta has willingly given up Paris to be with him in the country, and he sings his aria Di miei bellenti spiriti. He recalls how Violetta helped to bring out in him a calmer, more mature love. And after his aria, Alfredo exits and Violetta enters. The maid then brings into the room a dignified elderly gentleman. It's Alfredo's father, Germont, who accuses Violetta of ruining his family's reputation. Germont tells her that his daughter's plans for marriage are threatened by Violetta's scandalous affair with his son, and that she must be willing to leave Alfredo forever. Violetta sings the dramatic aria Non sapete quale affetto, in which she says that giving up Alfredo is impossible. Germont nevertheless insists that she tell Alfredo that she no longer loves him, and eventually Violetta reluctantly agrees to do so. She writes a farewell letter to Alfredo and has a messenger deliver it. Alfredo is shocked as he reads it, and just as he turns to go, he sees his father who has just entered. And in one of the great Verdi baritone arias, Di Provenza il Mar, Germont recalls Alfredo's happy childhood in Provence. He implores Alfredo to return home where the sympathy and kindness of his family will cure his grief. We're going to be listening to one of the great baritones who is still performing, Russian baritone Dmitry Hvorostovsky, a great Verdi baritone. What do we mean by a Verdi baritone? Verdi wrote very demanding music for baritone. Baritone voice is the middle voice of the three male voices, tenor, baritone, bass, and yet he insists that the baritone be able to sing very, very high and yet sound as if they're completely at ease, and oftentimes writes very, very lyrical music for the baritone. What is also interesting is that we're going to be seeing a very different production. In opera, we cannot take any physical setting for granted, and while many directors choose to have a traditional decor, a traditional physical setting for the opera, there are directors who choose to turn everything upside down, and an opera director named Willie Decker envisioned something completely different, and this premiered in Salzburg in 2005. And what we'll see here is a very austere set, which is how the whole opera looks, with just a few chairs. They're dressed in modern garb now. It's very, very austere. And so we're going to be hearing Dmitry Hvorostovsky sing his aria. So this was a performance of that same production at the Met in 2012, and it will be also have in the beginning tenor Matthew Polenzani. So beautiful singing, and certainly a very different set, wouldn't you agree? Now, right after this, suddenly Alfredo suspects that it is his rival, the Baron, who is behind all this. And so Act 2 immediately ends right afterwards with Alfredo rushing from the stage. So now we are in Act 3, and this brings us to a party in the Paris mansion of Violetta's friend, Flora. The festivities begin with a group of the ladies masquerading as gypsies, singing the delightful chorus Noi siamo zingarelle, followed by a number of the men dressed as Spanish matadors in the rousing chorus Di Madride noi siamo matadori. A lot of times these types of choruses are inserted into the opera for variety, but also to give the lead singers a well-needed break. Then begins the lengthy and dramatic Act 3 finale. Alfredo enters the party and is welcomed by everyone. He's asked about Violetta and answers that he doesn't care. Then goes over to the gaming table to join the others at cards. A moment later, who should arrive but Violetta in the arms of Alfredo's rival, the Baron. Alfredo wins every hand at the gaming table, saying that those who are unlucky in love are lucky at cards. The Baron compliments Alfredo on his luck, then offers to play him. Alfredo constantly beats the Baron, and the guests comment on Alfredo's luck. A servant's announcement that supper is served helps to diffuse the tension, if only temporarily. The performance we're going to watch in a moment begins at this point in the finale. Violetta has re-entered the room, having asked Alfredo to see her. He appears, and Violetta begs him to leave the party, warning him of the Baron's jealousy. Alfredo says he will leave only if she will go with him. In a desperate attempt to get Alfredo to leave, Violetta lies, saying that she is in love with the Baron. Outraged, Alfredo calls in the guests. He tells them that Violetta attempted to buy his love by giving her possessions to him. He calls on the guests to serve as witnesses that now he will pay her back in full, and throws the money he won that night at Violetta. In a dramatic chorus, Violetta's friends denounce Alfredo's insults and order him to leave. Germont, his father, chastises him and renounces him, and Alfredo to himself expresses regret for his own conduct. Then begins, as part of this finale, the magnificent closing ensemble, during which there are many different dialogues going on simultaneously. As Eugene had talked about, There's a lot of different things going on, and it musically all works. We're hearing Germont and others attempting to console Violetta, while the Baron challenges Alfredo to a duel. Meanwhile, Alfredo is crying out that he has forever lost his one true love, and over all of that, Violetta sings to Alfredo that someday he will know how great her sacrifice had been and how deeply he has wronged her. In conventional theater, such a scenario would probably be unintelligible to the audience, where you have everybody saying different things. But in opera, with each dialogue musically interweaving with the others, it is extremely effective and very unique. This is a performance at the Metropolitan Opera in 1981 with really an all-star cast in terms of the trio. Singing the role of Violetta is Ileana Kotrubash, okay, Romanian soprano. Typical opera, these are great opera stories. As it mentions there, her international breakthrough came in 1975 when she replaced Mirella Freni at La Scala as Mimi. Mirella Freni was sick, and so Ileana was called at her Kent home in England. She flew to La Scala immediately and arrived there at La Scala just in time to get fitted for her costume and immediately went on stage and performed. So great opera story there. And at the time of this performance, as quoted in the New York Times, it is unlikely that there is a better Violetta now on the world stages than Kotrubash. Then we have Placido Domingo, one of the world's outstanding singers. A Spanish tenor. He grew up around opera. His parents' opera company performed zarzuela, a form of Spanish opera. Has performed an incredible number of roles, 147 different opera roles, recorded over 100 complete operas, part of the best-selling classical album of all time, the first of the 3 tenors albums. Also achieving notable success as a crossover artist and winning numerous Grammy Awards in the process. The most amazing thing is he's 76 years old now. Most singers, opera singers, would retire in their early to mid-50s. He is still vocally active. However, he, a few years ago, decided to make the change from singing high tenor roles to baritone roles. But the fact that he is still able to give viable professional opera performances at age 76 is just absolutely remarkable. He's also a conductor and was general director of the Washington National Opera, and while he's still singing, he's currently general director of the Los Angeles Opera. So one of classical music's great musicians and highly respected. And rounding out this trio is as Germont Cornell McNeil. Born in Minneapolis, and again, considered to be one of the greatest Verdi baritones in the second half of the 20th century. Wonderful quote in his obituary in Opera News. Cornell McNeil was a giant in an age of giants, a stunning performer whose voice held seemingly limitless reserves of power throughout its range. McNeil may have had rivals, but he had no equals. So we're going to be watching now the Act 3 finale. So now we are in Act 4, and we're in Violetta's small apartment in Paris. She lies in bed, gravely ill, almost penniless. As the doctor leaves, he whispers to the maid that her death is only hours away. Violetta then reads a letter from Germont saying that he told Alfredo of her great sacrifice and that Alfredo will soon arrive to beg her forgiveness. Violetta looks at her reflection in the mirror and realizes that her illness is fatal. She then sings the tragic aria Addio del passato, in which all her lifelong hopes are shattered. Friendless and alone, she awaits a grave with no cross or flowers. This is a performance by one of the 20th century's greatest sopranos, Maria Callas. Actually born in Manhattan, but trained in Greece. Her mother moved her back to Greece when she was about 7 years old. 14 years old. And she became one of the most renowned and influential opera singers of the 20th century, praised for her bel canto technique. Bel canto literally means beautiful singing, and that involves, it is a style of Italian singing which truly emphasizes the beautiful voice, being able to sing in a very smooth legato fashion, very high, very low, very effortlessly, capable of great changes in loudness. In other words, having total control over the voice. And she was also a very fine singing actress, and so her musical and dramatic talents led her to being hailed as La Divina. And as mentioned in Opera News 2006, she's still one of classical music's best-selling vocalists and a singer by which most other sopranos still compare themselves to. So we're going to be watching this is a recorded performance, an audio recording with pictures of her, and there will be subtitles underneath. This is Addio del Passato. Suddenly, Alfredo enters. He and Violetta passionately sing of their love, which leads into the duet Parigi o cara noi lasceremo, in which Alfredo tenderly sings how he will take Violetta far away from Paris to restore her health and happiness. This revives Violetta, and she tells her maid to get the doctor because she now wants to live. But at the music's climax, Violetta sinks back into her bed. She is now within just a few moments of the end. The performance we will watch next begins at this point in the finale. The quintet Prendi queste l'immagine. The maid, Germont, and the doctor have entered. Germont now realizes that he had wronged Violetta. As a parting gift, Violetta gives Alfredo a miniature of herself, asking him to give it to the woman he may someday marry. All express their individual sorrow, which is suddenly interrupted as Violetta rises and sings deliriously that her pain is gone and life is returning. And with a final cry of ecstasy, she falls back lifeless, and the final curtain falls. This is the same cast as we saw in the other finale. This is the 1981 Metropolitan Opera cast. And this is, again, the very end of La Traviata.
What we have done is we have given you a few highlights and a few spoilers, but I would urge everyone to actually give opera a chance during the broadcast, which is again this coming Saturday and next Wednesday at the Cinemark. And one of the things we couldn't possibly do was to show you the cumulative dramatic effect of the unbroken dramatic development and dramatic momentum that Verdi builds over the 2-hour course of the opera. We did something very unnatural. We yanked the highlights out of the seamless fabric of the opera. And to see the real thing, please go to the movie theater. It is now possible to see great opera for the price of a movie ticket. We have the best of everything this way. And in addition to that, in the opera house, you'll see, well, you'll have much better audio and video quality. And you will also have interview with the singers and the director and the conductor and a whole bunch of other perks.
The only time you can go to the opera and eat popcorn.
That's true too. Although having spent a bunch of time in Nebraska with real corn, I don't get the idea of popcorn at all. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. The sign-up sheets are right here. And well, best of luck.